to my teaching learning session, and we continue and start with a new unit for BA courses, which is BPCC 132 Introduction to Social Psychology. Speaking of Unit 1, it's the introduction. We are going to talk about to how an introduction in terms of social psychology will introduce it as a science, will introduce this as a natural science. Also tell you that social psychology indeed is a scientific field. We study it in terms of the other sciences, and they're equivalently very evident in our society, something that we can relate to, something that we can notice and apply in our real life conditions. So let's continue with me with BBC C132, and I am being Sonal Singh to take care of your courses. So, what is social psychology as a field? A new field which is getting associated to psychology that talks about how we feel about, think about, and behave towards people, and how do these people impact us, how are their environmental variations are going to impact us, the people around us, how do they feel, they think, and they behave, they further influence us. So it's a very mutual connection that we talk about. It's about how you feel as a person, think, behave, and that influences other people, and how other people and their behaviors, their feelings and thoughts influences you, but in a social context. We talk about only having these impact and influences in a social context, which is in a condition which is social in nature, which has human interaction, which is interaction of human beings. This was given by Kassin and Fine and Marcus in 2017. This is very recent as a definition to us. Now let's understand what is the nature of social psychology. So speaking of the nature, we will understand, as I said, is it a natural science? Is it a science or not? What do we study? What is the scope of this field in the future coming times? So social psychology applies as a scientific study. Why? Because it has an implication and systematic way of studying human nature. Also, it uses scientific method to apply real life condition human behaviors in real conditions. So that talks about that it uses systematic observation of human behavior. It describes human behavior, measures human behavior in a systematic condition with standardized ways. Also in social context. So social psychologist studies refer to the data collected through direct observation or experiments. Such experiments and observations are carried out carefully. A detailed report is identified, even qualitatively and quantitatively analysis is done, and we further repeat the thing to identify, further repeat the entire process of observation, experiment, recording, putting out a report, again to verify if the result of the social psychological conditions are coming to be same objective time and again or not. So it is a scientific study because it uses scientific methods, scientific ways, uses scientific analysis like any other sciences, and also just like psychology on its own being. Then speaking of social psychology, studies what? See, it studies your thoughts, it studies your feelings and your behaviors, but it studies it in conditions of the social field. We are restricting your behavior, we are restricting your feelings, we are restricting the way you connect to people, but it has to be with people, has to be in a social condition. We need to relate to one another. Also, when we talk about social psychology, cognition plays a very important role. Cognition refers to the manner in which we process information. So what is cognition in social psychology? The process of knowing. So social psychology studies the cognition that relates to social activities. So how do you think, reason, problem solve, decide, process things in a social activity? And that helps us in understanding and predicting social behaviors. Like let's take an example. We know that the toddlers, when are playing, the few emotions that they experience is happiness, jealousy, and aggression, and then crying, which is feeling sad. So how did we come up to this conclusion? We came up to this conclusion because there were observation, there was scientific experiment that was done for a long period of time. We were able to see their behaviors and their cognition in a social activity. And when we saw this behavior and that, behavior, emotions, and feeling in that social condition time and again, that came to an understanding that we can now predict the behavior that children tend to act, have few emotions which are atypical to us: happiness, which is, in terms of the victory of joy, the jealousy, the aggression, and crying, which is sadness. So how did we come up to this? We came up to this because we obviously, like any other sciences, we repeatedly had observations, we made a detailed report and experimentation, we objectified it by doing it again and again, and understood the social psychology in terms of the cognition that's happening in that area. So, cognition of the child is thinking, reasoning, problem solving while playing. That gets to know that there are few emotions that will help us predict the child's or toddler's behavior. So, this is a simple way to tell us that social psychology is very applicable in real life conditions, and it is very impactful to us also. We as being social beings will be highly impacted by this, and social psychology is one of those sciences which is going to be more evident amongst us. So let's understand few more points about it. Social psychology studies individual behavior in social context, also studies the thoughts, feelings, and behaviors in social context. This component of social psychology refers that our behavior is influenced by the presence of others. See, the presence can be the real presence of people. At times, the presence could be the imagined presence of people. How can, when we talk about social psychology, how can imagined presence of people impact us? It can. Social media today. Do we see social media? Influencers. They are an imagined state of mind. They are not somebody that you are dealing with in real physical presence. They are not one of those. But we tend to get hugely impacted. Don't we follow trends of what they're wearing, follow the trends of the song, make reels accordingly? So, what is this? Real presence is having an individual who directly influences you, tells you to do something, impacts your feelings and behavior with their own direct feelings and behavior. That is a direct social psychology. Now, social psychology also gives us a new thing that our behaviors are impacted by presence of people. We are studying this also, but also by the imagined presence of people. So, what is the imagined presence of people? The news, the social media, the influencers, the any kind of chatbot or probably entertainment bot that you get. So the social context is I feel refer to the definition of social psychology does not have to be real or present. So you need to know the social context that we are referring to does not have to be essentially real, does not have to be essentially something which is present with you, but it could be something which is, imagined also, and something which is real or unpresent. So remember, in today's time, I feel social psychology and its implications are far more higher because children are changing their state of living. They are changing their mindset, they're changing their values, they're changing their way they look, they appear, they talk, and they connect to people according to the imagined presence of people, which is the social media. This was an idea which was given by Olpert in 1985, where he spoke about the real and the present in context to the social context. Now, let's come to one major contribution which is given by Kurt Lewin to social psychology. Kurt Lewin stated as a model to understand social behavior. He was a German American psychologist, often recognized as the founder of social psychology. So, Kurt Lewin is taken as the founder, not the father, but the founder of social psychology. So social scientists are interested in the forces that operate on individual and cause them to exchange in specific examples of social behavior. So remember, they are trying to tell you that social psychology is interested in what is happening to you, what are the kind of influences that are changing you, and the cause behind which we can state up examples and learn from them. So this is like engage in specific examples of social behavior, like a playing activity, an interaction at a workplace, probably an interview which is happening. So these are all social behaviors. They engage themselves in such examples to identify what influences us. What are the factors that are influencing us? So that was something, Kurt Lewin, which was greatly, interested in. Also, he gave us an equation to solve us what behavior is an outproduct of. So what the behavior is an outproduct of. That means what is resulting to behavior. So Kurt Lewin stated B is equal to F S into I, which is F P into E. The acronyms are like that. So it's BFP into E. P is the personality, which is the individual characteristic, and the E is the environment, which is the social situation. So, according to Kurt Lewin, your behavior is an outproduct of your personality characteristic when interacting with the kind of social condition and environmental factors that you're a part of. See, we can take the same examples and continue to differ them. Let's take an example. You enter to an interview room. Your personality factors are very confident. So, when a confident person gets into a room which is filled with many people, what are you going to exhibit? You're going to exhibit more confidence. You feel okay. Many people are going to judge me. Great. I'm probably going to be selected. They all are going to like me. So that's your personality factor interacting with the social situation. Now let's take an example of a person who's not very confident, but is sure of his ability. Now, this second person, when gets inside a room and he sees so many people, see the fact that we mentioned the personality characteristic, individual characteristics are not confident, but the person knows about his or her skill. So he's aware of his or her skills. So speaking of that, remember that person might get nervous, might feel anxious. But at the same time, if this person is taken to the same interview and there are lesser number of people, that person will feel more glorified. There'll be a glorified sense of confidence. While lesser people, he'll feel more comfortable, he'll feel more known, and he feels there's so not so many people who are judging me. So remember how your behavior changes because your personality is interacting with a social situation, and your individual characteristics are extremely important in this. So that's something which we talk about as nature of social psychology. Talking about social psychology is a scientific study. Reasoning it out why it's a scientific study, we also talk about it studies individual thought, feelings, and behaviors in social context. Also, it refers to the influences that are experienced by people. These influences can be real or imagined, it could be present or unpresent. Then we also spoke about the contribution of Kurt Lewin that stated that behavior is an outproduct of P into E, which is your personality characteristics into the environment. Environment could be social situations. So this finishes of telling us that what is exactly social psychology. Now let's understand, is there a scope of this subject? Is there a scope of social psychology? Yes, it is. Why? Social psychology essentially concentrates on the individual behavior in social context. We are social beings, we are functioning as social beings. So don't you feel when we are functioning as social beings, this kind of psychology is going to be something which is going to be of great importance in the future years and even the years now. Why? Because of the fact that when we speak about the scope, the subject matter of social psychology is the interaction that people have amongst themselves, how that interaction impacts them, as well as the society, and how the interaction of society impacts people. Let me take an example and let you know how this is so evident in today's time. We realize that we are living in a very quiet, very quaint sort of a place, which is simple. Simplicity is the key of that, that little district that you're staying in. Suddenly, there is residential shape, there is malls that have come in, there are multiplexes that comes and hits that district. What will happen? The population will increase, noise, traffic, everything will increase. Tell me the influence of that development of society will impact you, and your development as as people together will impact the society. So this is a very smaller district and place, and people do not believe in going out. Remember, the economy will go down of that area. Why? Because people here are not one of those who go to multiplexes, malls, and shop around much. Here, people are more united, more collective, looking forward to family and social consideration and social values, connecting with family to family rather than that. So remember, social psychology is something that only focuses on individual behavior in a social context. So we need to know, interesting, that the scope is quite elaborate. The scope is beaming in the future times. Also, to know that people generally, express the feelings of approvals and disapprovals, favorability and unfavorability, likes and dislikes towards different people, issues, and also further influence their thought and action. A very simple consideration of giving you example that how the scope is so much that you can see it in your world around. you know at times when you don't like some people, you don't usually go in that social condition, you do not interact with that social condition. At times when there is dislikability towards some kind of cuisine or some kind of area, you make sure that you do not pick that area even with your family and friends. So did you see how that entire area impacts you? Your likes and dislikes impacts you. Similarly, if you like a person and you like the company of that friend of yours, you are bound to go to her or him time and again. Why? Because they influence, the kind of influence that they have on you, on your thought and actions is something of approval or favorability. So that's how your social cognition and social thought is being formed about that person. Also, one of the most emerging area of social psychology is social cognition. Very new this concept is, but I feel it's very important. It's very critical equally. Why? You see, people have imagined the fact that what is cognition? The process of knowing. What would be social cognition? The process of knowing, thinking, decision making, problem solving, and other things in the fact of being able to perceive it, ponder, remember information related to the social stimuli. So speaking of that, One of the most emerging areas of social psychology and social psychology is social cognition, which is the way people perceive, the way people think, the way people remember anything in relation to a social situation. And also other social influences like core areas of social psychology, which refers to, we will talk about some core areas of social psychology that impacts our behavior, feelings, and thoughts. Also, social psychologists are increasingly in our society because they want to know why some people are proactively indulging in some activities and altruism, and some people are bystanders. So, some people are showing acts of pro social behavior, which is helping other people without any greed and without any exchange in return. Also, some people are completely altruistic, only giving, giving, and giving. So, these are some new things that we are going to study in social psychology. Also, social psychologists have vastly studied various phenomena in terms of social group formation, what are group dynamics, how these dynamics are formed, and what are group structures, what is group formation, how is groups impacting individual and individual impacting group. So that's something which is in a nutshell telling you the nature and scope of social psychology. Now let's go ahead with what do exactly social psychologists study. Social psychology studies all the activities which includes you and a social context. So it's activities of individual in the presence of other people. We also study the process of social interaction between people. So we will want to, the first and the foremost is always, studying people interacting in a social condition. So activities of individual in the presence of others. Also the relationship between individuals and groups, the nature and causes of social behavior. We want to understand what is the nature of social behavior and what is the cause of this social behavior. How did this come into play? Also, we are going to talk about social behavior being a part of the social structure systematically. So where does it fit, how does it fit, etc. So that's in a nutshell. You can have a look at it. Let's move ahead. Now we are going to talk about a little bit of the historical background of social psychology, talking about where did it all started. We know that the founder is Kurt Lewin. We need to know where did that thought of social psychology, that interaction of people, social beings, all of this needs to be studied. This was started by this group of scholars, German scholars, in 1908 by Neinthel and Lazarus, published on social psychology, containing facts, articles regarding collective mind. So the two psychologists wrote, and found some articles regarding collective minds and facts. Also, at the end of 19th century and beginning of 20th century, social psychology started to systematically measure your thoughts, feelings, behaviors of human beings. So at the end of 19th century and in the beginning of 20th century, there was a stir movement that people wanted to know that how can you know thoughts of people. So there were measurement of thought, there was measurement of social behaviors, feelings, and emotion. And also at the same time, we need to know there's a psychologist called John Watson. He's the behaviorist psychologist who published his classic scientific manifesto of psychology in 1930, which has information about social psychology. In 1924, which was inspired by Watson, Floyd Allport, published an agenda on social psychology, agenda taking social psychology ahead. Then Allport came in. Allport told us that the influence of humans and their activities happens in societies, and societies' activities impact people. This was a flourishing time. A lot of experimental things were happening, experimental sciences were working, and a lot of experimental observation of social behaviors. People interacting together was happening. And the first social activity and social experiment that took place was Norman Triplett in 1898 study of how people can, put more effort in a task when there are people present are more, people present are present as observers or competitors. This is a very old thing which was 1898 by Norman Triplett, which is a great experiment which is conducted worldwide, and it was a very famous experiment that talked about how people can put their effort, keeping in mind are the people who are with me are competitors or are observers. So this was like the beginning telling us that that was the formal, the way that it all came into place. Then the foundational years of social psychology, let's understand that too when we speak of foundational years. See, 1940s and 50, Kurt Lewin Kurt Lewin and Leon Fistinger. They were scientists, scientifically rigorously working for social psychology. Lewin is actually the founder. Kurt Lewin has stated, and also has taken as the father of social psychology. because Kurt Lewin has done so many experiments, so many observation in the field of social psychology, develop important ideas, discipline, focuses on dynamic interaction amongst people. Also, during the World War II, the studies of conformity by Sheriff experiment, Muzaffar Sharif in 1936 came up, and Solomon Ash in 1952. These were turnarounds. These times were turnaround. When there were experiments coming or social categories, and which was observing people together, which was very famous experiment was Sheriff in 1936 and 1952 Solomon Ash. Then expansion of social psychology took place. The foundational years on the at the look on the screen. Now let's continue with expansion of social psychology. So we speak about the introduction, we speak about how it all started. Let's understand social psychology expanded where. After there were experiments which was done, which was seeing and watching people. After that, Lalton and Darley in 1968 did an experiment having people. He talked about how people, interact and get alerted in an alarming situations, and also in the situation of where people are in need of help. And Leon Berkowitz in 1962 started a study of human aggression. Like the first study started in 1962 by Leonardo's human aggression. In late 20s, we found that social psychology has included its various attitudes, significance of cognitive processes and attitude. Attitude formation came in, how attitude are formed, how they can be changed, what impacts attitude formation, and what impacts, when we talk about attitude change in the last 20th century. Due to this, so much of advances are coming in on the field of social psychology on cognitive processes, further was substantiated by Fiske and Taylor. Lot of cognitive experiments started in social field to validate the presence of social psychology and call it as a scientific study. So these were some expansion years of social psychology. A look on the screen. Now let's move ahead. We are going to talk about social psychology in 20th century. When we talk about 21st and 20th century was the age of expansion, I felt, for social psychology. Why? We became scientific as a social psychology. Scientists started working on experiments. There were experiments on groups, there were experiments by Solomon Ash, there were experiments in human aggression, and also with people together. Social psychology in 21st century has been still expanding. We are still growing, and social psychology has started studying impact of social situation not only on people but on our health, on our happiness and well-being, important role of evolutionary experiences and culture on our behavior. So I feel 21st century is working on bigger diverse thought process. We are not just now talking about human aggression or social conditions and situation. We are talking about human lives. We are talking about how social context, social psychology situation impact our happiness, impact our health, impact our well-being. Also, we are talking about evolutionary experiences and culture that impacts our behavior. So anything that is coming from to your family from very long time and coming from an ancestry time, how it impacts you, how does it impact your social cognition, your cognition functioning in social environment. So it's such also the field of social neuroscience has also emerged lately in 21st century later, which studies how our social behavior, both influences and is influenced by the activities of the brain, which is very true. Some hormonal secretions impact the way you behave in a social conditions. At times it could be an induced condition or a natural condition also. Now let's talk about what is the status of social psychology in India. See, speaking of India, we are all taking our most of our learning is coming from Western psychology. So we need to know some of the most famous psychologist that we have was N. Sen Gupta. He was the first chairman of the Department of Psychology in Calcutta University, also in association with the eminent sociologist, which was Radha Kamal Mukherjee. Also, 1928, the first book was also written, quoted in India, which was entitled as Introduction of Social Psychology by N. Sen Gupta. Also, in the later years that we talk about, the later years of 1940s and 50s, which was after independence, Indian social psychologists continue to work in the areas of prejudice, discrimination, stereotypes. How are they formed? How are they impacting you? How are attitudes being formed? And large-scale conduction of surveys happened. Large-scale conduction surveys, which was interviews were taking place Questionnaires were, conducted around the world, taking care of various attitudes were being measured of people. There is also a scientific method to study attitudes of people. There is also a scale which studies attitude, which is a social attitude scale. Sodhi's attitude scale, which was referred, and with this we get to know by 1920s and later 1950s post-independence, social psychology had gripped India equally. There were books written on that. There were experiments on a youth scale which was done. We were relating all the Western social cognition concepts to Indian. See, Indian concepts will talk about prejudices, it will talk about stereotypes, it will talk about discrimination, it will talk about how attitudes are formed from the beginning of our grandparents' time and impacts us here. So this is something that we talk about as social psychology in India. Now let's connect and understand how is social psychology considered to be an interdisciplinary approach. So what do we understand by the what caters us to the interdisciplinary approach? It says how does the two disciplines function together? So social psychology and social sciences are greatly intermingled. They function hand in hand. They don't overlap each other, but they function hand in hand. So let's study the first how social psychology and anthropology interact. Anthropology is the study of human culture. We all know the field of human culture will directly be associated to social psychology. Human culture consists of shared values, belief system, the attitude, practice of group of people, and these values go from generation to generation. And this is what we are studying in the evolutionary experiences of social psychology. So this is so connected that social psychology is greatly influenced by social sciences. It picks it up from there. It studies the beliefs. It see how beliefs are going from generation to generation. Now coming to a subject which is very quantifying, which is economics and social psychology. The field of economics deals with with the trends of production, distribution, selling, purchasing, the consumers consumptions of goods, services particular to society. This equally diverts interest on social psychologists to identify what is the kind of selling behavior and what is the kind of buying behavior. What kind of people will be buying more and what kind of people are selling more? How can you increase your production on the basis of this, on the basis of the social behaviors of people that they have in the conditions of buying goods and selling goods? So consumption greatly depends on social psychology, which is people behaving, acting in a social condition. Also, social psychology and political science. Political science is the study of political organization, institution, and especially governments. And some social psychologists conduct researches on political behavior. Surveys of questionnaires, interviews are conducted on voting, on party liberation, also liberal values, conservative value, political advertisement, agendas of political ideas today. How are they connected to social psychology? Check it out. How is it not? Our political views of a party, a party identification will help us identify our voting ways. Our voting ways will help us understand what kind of view do we hold. Are we the liberal one or the conservative ones? So all of this is interconnected. Then we come to sociology and social psychology, which is greatly associated because sociology is the study of societies and groups that form societies. Although both the sociologists and social psychologists are interested in how people behave in groups and society and as a single unit, whereas social psychologists focus on individual member that make up the group. So yes, when we talk about sociologists, they do have a very individual aspect of people. But when we talk about social psychologists, they focus on a group aspect of people. How do people come up and make up a group? How do people come up and join and become members of a group? So they do come up as a destination to separate things, but they both are studying the same. They are studying human values, they are studying human beings, they are studying human beings in a social context, and also sociology is study of societies and human beings within that society. So that completes the interconnection of telling that social psychology is something which is an interdisciplinary approach. Let's try and see what all other approaches that it's connected to. It's associated to biological psychology because everything that people think, do, believe, it's all biological interconnection. Your process of thinking, your brain functions, it's mind and brain functioning together. Mind is something which is structurally cannot be seen, the brain can be, but it impacts the mind. The mind that cannot be seen, the vigor, the strength, the willpower impacts the brain functioning. So they both go hand in hand, and so is social psychology. Social psychology and clinical psychology has great connections. So does developmental and personality psychology. Clinical psychology, because the impact of society can tell us on people, can tell us that what are the kind of disturbed interpersonal relationships they have. Social psychology, when dealing with values, belief system, discrimination, can tell us that how developmental and human development of a child has been disrupted or has come to difficult notes because of what kind of interaction, what kind of influence. So I feel it's greatly connected that we talk about. It's an interdisciplinary approach. Social psychology completely grouped by cognitive, sociology, clinical, and personality psychology. So that completes and tells us that yes, social psychology is an interdisciplinary approach. So now let's move ahead with another concept. This concept talks about the factor that levels of analysis of social behavior. We are going to now focus our attention on social psychology, its introduction, nature, and scope to what is a social behavior. Let's continue. Now, speaking of this, let's understand this in great details to understand the introduction equally. Levels of analysis of social behavior will tell us what kind of interaction are we having and is which is making the social behavior. Beautifully given, see, it is individual, intrapersonal. We need to know what is, let's first understand what is intrapersonal. Intrapersonal is an understanding. What's intra? Intrapersonal level would be what? Intrapersonal is understanding of one's own self, one's own feelings, thoughts, behaviors, your goals, directly, indirectly having an insight into one's own conscious and knowing what is needed by one. Also, analysis at this level, the individual intrapersonal level, analysis of individuals are involved. It involves fundamental constitution in social interaction. As conceptualized in psychology, every individual is unique. His or her biological inheritance is also, which is very true, is very unique. Thought process, affect, and behavior. So here we are trying to understand the development of the social behavior is individual and intra level, which is intra is one's own thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, and individual intra is we all are unique even if we are staying in the same society. This, let's take an example, siblings or cousins staying in the same house, the five set of cousins staying in the same house, you will find their personality is different, which is Kurt Lewin's behavior is equal to personality into environmental conditions, which was social situation. So even the five cousins will have different personality characteristics. Not all of them will react to a situation in the similar pattern. So we all are unique. At the same time, because unique in his or her biological inheritance, despite coming from the same family line, we have different chromosomes, 23 from 23 interacting. That further leads to different thought process, different affect and behavior. And intra, it's about knowing your own thought process, feelings, thoughts, and behaviors. Now, speaking of interpersonal interaction, what is interpersonal? Let's understand. What do we understand by interpersonal? Then I'll give you examples of all of them again. Interpersonal is an interaction that happens with amongst people to people. It could be society, society to society, the most set of groups of people to groups of people, individual to individual. So individuals are impacted in many other ways. Remember, the first way that we are impacted is, I feel, the presence of somebody, they being around us, and our communication, our thoughts, feelings, and everything. That's interpersonal. So in everyday life, communication from others may significantly influence the way you think, the way you understand a situation in a social context. Also, your social world is highly impacted by the way we are interacting with people. Also, attempts by others at persuasion may change in individuals' beliefs. At by others at persuasion may change in individuals' belief about the world and his or her attitude towards a person, groups, or other subjects. So I'll tell you this: interpersonal interaction is trying to tell us. Let's take an example. There are a group of friends that they have. Now, intra. All of those group of friends have an individual intra. They all are unique. They look different. They speak in a different way. They all have, you know, their set of knowledge, which is getting reflected in their speech. Also, their thoughts, feelings, and behaviors about each other differs from one another. And now let's talk about the interpersonal interaction. Now, the fact that significantly everyone is coming from a different culture, but they're interacting with one another. So they develop a kind of language amongst themselves, which is influencing one another. So remember, the one who's the most influential one will impact the others in terms of the way they think, the way they talk, the way they put up themselves. So let's take an example. If one in the group is a very avid reader, so haven't you seen, if there are friends who are really great and they're avid readers and they love to read, the other friends also start reading because you have such an influence. You have started influencing and persuading people in terms to change their belief system about reading and to read evidently every day. And you probably have this factor that you tell them that reading is something which is increasing your knowledge and wisdom. And you never know, the groups of people start doing that. So there's an attempt by others, which is at persuasion, may change an individual's belief system about the world and his or her attitude towards groups, people, and things. Also, at times, when we are very closely connected to our friends and people that influence us, we end up disliking a community because people who are influencing you or probably are in connection with you interpersonally do not like that section of the group in society. This is how we form stereotypes, this is how we form prejudices, and further discrimination happens because we are being persuaded by people, in the thought process of how the other groups are and how the world around us is. So this is how, impactful, and how level of behaviors, being social behaviors, make changes in the society, builds up new concepts, builds up new things, builds up, in terms of friendship, stereotypes, prejudices, etc. Now coming to interaction between individual and group, one of the most important on this. Have a look of the above two level interaction. Now let's come to a very mutual interaction that we need to talk about, which is individual and group. Social psychology analyzes obviously the impact of group on behaviors of its individual members. See, every individual member belongs to its own different set of, belongs to many groups at a time. These groups influence and regulate the behaviors of members, and typically by establishing norms and rules. So, speaking of this, we need to know that social psychology is interested in how a group impacts an individual, how a group has a norm, a group has rules, regulation, roles, responsibility, and a structure that influences that unique person, that intra level that the person has, and he changes himself because he wants to be a part of that group. So every individual belongs to a different group, and these groups influence them. It regulates the behaviors of their members, and typically by establishing norms. How so? That's what I answered. A, a individual is getting impacted in the group because of what? Because of the rules and the norms which is created by the group, the structure, the authenticated behaviors that they put up. That this is how it needs to be done. Let's take an example. You be a part of the cultural group, and cultural group states that we have our meetings every Fridays, and we have a dress code which has to be that you need to be wearing a white shirt and a black pant, and there needs to be a generation of idea every time that we come to a group. So you have to be ready with an idea, you are dressed up as per the theme, you are neatly placed, and you walk to the section. Also, if novelty is something that the group appreciate, we will find creative ideas. So one of the result of this is, when we listen to group work according to group, is called conformity, the process by which the group member adjusts his or her behavior because they want to be a part of the group, so they adjust to the group norms. Don't we do that? Let's talk about peer grouping. We know that our parents keep telling us, don't be a part of this group, don't be a part of that group. Why? Because they see that your friends are influencing you too much. How? Because you are changing to be a part of that group. So when you are changing to be a part of that group, you are adjusting to the norm. So what are you doing? You're conforming. This is called the process of conformity. When we make changes in our behavior to conform to the group norms and social behaviors of that group. So this is the three levels. Let's just connect with one more example that helps us and support us. Let's take an example. You join a new place of work, right? That you have joined that place because you have that uniqueness in yourself of brilliant ideas. Your grades are great, you're coming from a very reputed college, and you have a good work skill. So this is what the individual intra level that gets you into the workplace. Now, the interpersonal levels. Now you are given a project in which you're a part of a group. So now the project members tell you that this is something that you need to do. How? And you listen to them, you communicate very nicely to them, you get persuaded by them. The reason for this is because you know that I've got a project, I need to complete this. So your social world is getting impacted by the kind of people that you're interacting with. And your attitudes are changing. First is the project that is given to you. Let's take an example. There's a social category project that you need to do research on. Why does stereotypes leads to prejudices, and why there are stereotypes which are built in children also. So you feel that no, your family is not built in any stereotypes. So as an individual, the intra level feels that this is not possible. But there are researches which is quoted to you interpersonally by your group members, which changes your thought process about stereotypes and prejudices. So this is impacting your social world, making you rethink all of that. Then come to individual and group. Now the fact that the group has a norm that this needs to be completed has to, there needs to be observation experiment done with people. And if you do not complete the project alongside with other people, remember your grading will be done as a member or as an employee of the work. So what will you do? You will get into such work with groups that you do not really conform to. But you are conforming to a behavior because the project needs to be completed. You need a hike. You are an employee. You're a part of this group. All the members of the group agree to that condition. Just that your values are different. You don't want to be a part of that thought of social, stereotypes, prejudice, and discrimination. But you have to do it. Why? Because the group that you're a part of, it typically has a norm of doing such behaviors, and it is present in society. So you do what? You confine, you adjust your behavior for that being of that project, and you complete it. So how is this happening? Don't we all do that? We all want to be individual self when we are in college. As soon as you start working, interpersonal interaction happens, people influences you. Your ways of working differs. Why? Because you need to know, because of the sense of conformity that we do to the society. So this is such an important aspect that we have and we speak of is levels of analysis of social behavior. Understanding of social behaviors is important. I'll quote you the reason why. Because of the fact that when we speak about social behaviors, these behaviors in tune, tell about the kind of social activity that is done in a context. So this is ideally social psychology of you. Your social behavior is a reflection of how do you behave in a social condition, which is you being impacted, you being influenced, you're influencing others, etc. So all the three levels on the screen. Let's move ahead and talk about this interaction that we are going to today finish our note with. So, and also do a little understanding of social psychology from the beginning. So, interaction between groups is another concern of social psychology, which is impact of one group on activities and structure of another group. Relationship between two groups may be friendly, hostile, cooperative, and competitive. So, this is another thing that we need to talk about is when we are forming groups, it's just not individual and group that are interacting. We need to understand that social psychology has major concern group and group interaction. How one group activity influences the other groups, how the structure of another group impacts the other, also the relationship between the two groups. We all know when let's take an example, when we are playing cricket, there's how many source of emotion that comes in. We feel that the cricket is a job, but the cricketers feel that it's a job to them, and also their patriotism to function well and to present themselves well as their celebrities also. People are role modeling them. So they tend to present their best. At the same time, the two groups that are competing amongst each other, that is teams which are competing amongst one another, may display feelings of friendship at times, which we all see. At times, there is so much of hostility, negative feelings. At times, they are cooperative, and sometimes they are just competing like healthy individuals. So, social psychology is greatly interested in understanding of what are groups, how are groups formed, what is the concern of impact of one group activity over the other. Also, the relationship between two groups may be friendly, hostile, cooperative, and competitive. So this is something that we need to understand when we have an introduction of social psychology. What is social psychology? So at a brief, let's go to some major connotation that we have to bring into our knowledge today and not forget as we complete the class today. Knowing what is social psychology is a study of how you think, feel, and behave in context, in a social context, and also at times think, feel, and behave being influenced by other people in a social context. Remember, social psychology is a scientific study. So, speaking of that, like any other sciences, it uses scientific methods, scientific ways of conduction, systematic ways of conduction, and analysis so that it is repeated and verified. Once it's verified, you can predict circumstances, and that's what scientific study does, help you predict behaviors. Social psychology not only studies individuals in social context but also cognition. Social cognition, to remember, is a new aspect which came up with social psychology, which is how do you think, feel, and behave cognitively, which is the way of reasoning, problem solving, decision making in a social context. Then the second pointer that we need to take in consideration was the contribution of Kurt Lewin. A very important contribution of Kurt Lewin that we needn't forget and need not put behind, which is regularly used, and we can predict people's behavior like that, which is behavior is equal to personality into environment, which is behavior is an outproduct of individual's personality characteristics and the social situation which are surrounding the person, which is the environmental condition which is surrounding the person. So this is something that we talk about as what are we going to take behind. So this was given by whom? This was given by Kurt Lewin. Also, the scope of social psychology is humongous now to note because it's growing in nature. We are studying social behaviors at a greater context, not only the influence of people on society, but society on people. Also, after Kurt Lewin, we need to talk about the areas of social psychology. Social psychology is studying social cognition, people's thoughts and behaviors, their feelings. Social psychology is also planning to study what are groups, what are group behaviors, how is a group formed, group formation. We are also talking about attitudes, prejudice, stereotypes, prejudice and stereotypes. We are talking about pro-social behaviors. We are talking about altruistic behaviors. Group dynamics is something which has lately come into play. Group is something which is gaining importance in social psychology because we are social beings. We live in groups only. We want to be a part of a cultural group, a friend group, a work professional group, a high end group. We want to be a part of a club, high end club groups. We can only function when we are a part of a group. So study of group dynamics, group composition, this is also something which is greatly important. Also, what do social psychologists study? Remember, they study you in a social context. Your behavior, your feelings, what is the cause, how are you getting influence, etc. Also, historical background. Starting, we need to know it started with German scholars. There were a lot of contributors from Lazarus to John Watson to Watson and Allport. Also, there was the first experiment which was done in 1898 by Norman Triplet, and one of the most famous experiments which was done in conformity, which was by Solomon Asch and Muzaffar Sharif in 1936 and 52, respectively. Need to know that the founder and the father of social psychology is considered to be Kurt Lewin, and there were other great contributors like Leon Festinger. Also, to know that there was an expansion of social psychology happened with what? It happened with a huge experiment that we have. The experiment was given by Darley and Bibb Laltane in 1968. Also, human aggression was also studied when we speak about social psychology. And in late 20s, we need to know a lot of advances happened. Social psychology started focusing on cognitive processes, how being in a social condition make changes in the way you think about people, you behave, you talk, and you regulate your feelings. Only being in social conditions. We will never forget the Kurt Lewin's formula. B is equal to FP into E. Behavior is an outproduct of individual's personality characteristics into social situation, which is your environment. 21st century, there was an evolutionary change. We started studying various social behaviors and then came to social psychology in India. Social psychology in India was actually, something which was got into highlights by N. Sen Gupta. He wrote the first book of Introduction to Social Psychology in 1928 by N. Sen Gupta. He was also the first chairman of psychology department in Calcutta University, along with sociologist Radha Kamal Mukherjee. To repeat again, remember all the knowledge of social psychology, which was used when we speak about what do you call this social psychology, when we speak about western countries, it all started applying to Indian country, but with Indian traditional problems. We started speaking about group dynamics, we started speaking about influences of group, we started speaking about stereotype, prejudice, social attitudes are formed, how are attitudes being formed, changed and made. So all the western theories started getting applied to India in the social psychology context in India. Then it's an interdisciplinary approach, like social psychology connects well with anthropology, economics, political science, even sociology, and it is also connected to biology. And one of the last connection is that systematic scientific connection. Social psychology is greatly influencing clinical, and clinical influencing sociology. So is cognitive, developmental, and personality. So a bigger change in Indian society needs to be known happened with social psychology. Let's have an implication of this now. As we had studied the levels of social behavior, let's see where do we make these researches. See, we make these researches where there's a high sense of discrimination amongst people. We want to know why it's happening and how it's happening. What is the impact and what are the sources? Second, social psychology is also talking about the kind of interaction we are building with the passage of time. So, interaction when it was 19th, 20th century, 21st, and now in our century, how the interaction between people, the social behavior is changing at intra level, at inter level, and also at the same time at the interaction between group and individual group. Why? Because the influences of society is greatly happening on India. There is a high sense of social validation which is needed by children today. They change their complete behavior because they need a social validation. So that's how social psychology comes into play, because we are dictated, we are marked, and we are turned and tossed by social society. We function according to them. We dress up, we talk by the way the society's values, belief systems are, the cores of your societies are. So that's of greater interest today, that the implication of social psychology is far more reaching, applicable, and practical than it's thought. Also, coming to the last that we did today, there were three levels of interaction. So, whenever you see a situation, remember there are three interactions of social behaviors that is happening. First, the intra level, then the interpersonal interaction, remember, then the individual and group, which is the interaction of individual to group and group to individual. They summarize your social behavior in terms of why are you socializing, okay, which is why is your social behavior happening. Second, what kind of social behavior is happening, and the last is who is impacting your social behavior. So that completes with today's understanding of social behavior as one major context where we need to always remember its levels. And last is the growing concerns of social psychology, which is coming down to groups, how groups are interacting with one another, what kind of impact one group is having to others. So one set of members having to another set of members, and at the same time the kind of relationship this two groups have today. Are they influencing in terms of cooperative manner? It's competitive. Is it very hostile? It's negative or friendly? So to conclude, social psychology is a scientific study, right? It's a study of understanding people's feelings, thoughts, and behaviors. But remember that always will happen in a social context. We also talk about here the influences that happens on our behaviors by the presence of real or imagined presence of people. So real is when people are physically present, imagine is when we have it in terms of over the phone, over the social media, when we are building castles in the air and overthinking, that's also something which is an imagined category. And lastly, it is using all scientific method to study the implications of society like a very fully fledged interdisciplinary approach and subject. That completes with the first understanding of what is social psychology and its introduction today. Thank you.